Denmark was never supposed to be rich. This country is small with a cold climate, and it has almost no oil resources. It doesn't possess a large-scale industrial base. Nearly half of the total value its economy creates. Income taxes are extremely high, and a 25% VAT is applied almost every product. And workers in Denmark are among those working the fewest in developed countries. Yet somehow, Denmark has still become one of the most prosperous nations on earth. The Danish economy runs smoothly, its businesses expand globally, and its citizens receive free university education, universal health care, and enjoy one of the highest standards of living in the world. While many developed countries struggle with rising public debt and stagnant wages, Denmark continues to grow wealthier. So how is this happening? At first glance, you might think this is just another familiar Scandinavian success story. But unlike Norway, Denmark didn't rise thanks to abundant oil and gas. Unlike Sweden, whose economy is backed by global tech giants, Denmark actually surpasses both countries on many key indicators. It has faster GDP growth, higher income per capita, and one of the lowest public debt ratios in Europe. Yet before calling Denmark a perfect economy, we need to look at the cracks within its structure. Soaring housing costs, labor shortages, and pressure on the welfare system, especially from immigration, and an aging population. These show that the Danish model is not without its own problems. Still, it remains an incredibly efficient system. So the question is, why? How did Denmark achieve this? Was it just luck? Or is there a clear formula behind its success? To find the answer, as usual, we need to address several important questions. Why don't high taxes act as a barrier, as many assume? And does Denmark possess certain advantages that other countries simply don't? And finally, is this equality-driven paradise truly sustainable? In the long run, once we answer all of these questions, we can finally place Denmark on the economic ranking and evaluate whether this country has what it takes to rise to the very top. It's easy to assume that Denmark has always been wealthy. But in reality, for most of its history, this country looked nothing like that. For centuries, Denmark was just a poor agricultural nation dependent on farming, fishing, and small-scale trading. Meanwhile, neighbors like Germany, Britain, and France accelerated through industrialization. Even when Europe entered a major transformation in the 19th Denmark century, remained dependent mainly on exporting dairy and meat, with almost no high-value industries, such as machinery, chemicals, or modern manufacturing. By the late 20th century, Denmark found itself in difficulty. The country faced economic crises, war-related disruptions, and a poorly developed industrial sector. However, everything changed dramatically after World War II. Despite being occupied by Nazi Germany, from 1940 to 1945, Denmark was fortunate to preserve most of its infrastructure, and it faced an important choice: remain a low-productivity agricultural economy, or modernize and integrate into the rapidly growing global trade network. Denmark chose the latter. Over the following decades, it opened up its economy and joined the European Free Trade Association, and eventually the European Economic Which later became the European Union. By integrating into the world's largest trading bloc, Denmark gained access to vast markets, allowing its industries to grow far beyond the limits of its small domestic market. Meanwhile, like other Nordic countries, Denmark began building the Nordic model, a system combining a market economy with a strong welfare state. Education was one of their university education became free, and so did workers maintained skills and adaptability, thanks to a national commitment to lifelong learning. In contrast to many developed economies, where people study only during the early years of life and hope that knowledge lasts through their entire careers. That knowledge would be enough for an entire career, and those efforts paid off. Workers in Denmark became one of the most productive workforces in the world. A universal healthcare system was also introduced. Unlike many countries where medical costs can push families and businesses into hardship, Denmark provides high-quality healthcare services for all citizens. This is not only seen as a social policy, but also as a smart economic strategy. Healthy workers take fewer sick days and have longer careers, meaning more people contribute to the economy. And then came another unexpected factor: bicycles. Copenhagen is consistently ranked among the most bike-friendly cities, and this did not happen by accident. Since 2009, the government has invested over $200 million in bicycle infrastructure. Why do that? Because cycling keeps people healthier, reduces stress, and increases productivity. Beyond personal benefits, bicycles help Denmark reduce traffic congestion, improve air quality, and cut travel times significantly, making workers' lives more convenient and the economy more efficient. But all of this required large investments. In the late 1960s, Denmark made a bold decision. The country massively expanded its welfare system, funding free healthcare, free education, and many other social programs through higher taxes. Denmark's tax-to-GDP ratio rose from 29% in 1965 to nearly 50%. Critics, as in most economies, warned that high taxes would make businesses uncompetitive. But what happened was completely opposite to those pessimistic predictions. A well-educated and healthy workforce became one of Denmark's most valuable assets. Yet even this alone was not enough to make the country truly wealthy. The real value lay in what it enabled to flourish: innovation, true creativity, and the creation of high-value industries. Take Novo Nordisk, for example. Founded in 1983, this Danish pharmaceutical company chose to focus on a very narrow market, the treatment of diabetes, and then became the world leader in this field. Today, Novo Nordisk controls nearly 1/3 of the global insulin and has also achieved major success in other areas such as weight loss drugs. They are not fully classified as weight loss drugs. These achievements have helped the company become the most valuable business with a market capitalization exceeding $350 billion. Then there is Maersk, Denmark's shipping giant, handling up to 14% of global trade worldwide. Founded in 1900, Maersk grew rapidly by leveraging Denmark's strategic location between the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. Today, Maersk is one of the largest shipping companies in the world, in a time when global trade is busier than ever, at least for now. And then there's the wind energy sector. In the 1990s, when most countries were ramping up fossil fuel extraction, Denmark chose a different path, investing in wind power. At the time, this choice was considered unusual. Remember, this was more than 50 years ago, when awareness of emissions and the environment wasn't common. Oil and gas were still the backbone of global industry, and renewable energy was considered expensive and unreliable. Yet Denmark stayed committed to this path. Today, that investment has paid off massively. Denmark now produces more than 50% of its electricity from wind, far surpassing most developed countries. And this alone is already an impressive achievement, especially as energy security becomes increasingly important. But Denmark did not stop at developing the technology. They commercialized it. Today, the country has become one of the leaders, global leader in renewable energy, with companies like Vestas exporting wind turbines around the world. Denmark is also among the developed countries with some of the lowest per capita CO2 emissions, showing that economic growth does not necessarily require sacrificing the environment. For a small nation with almost no major natural resources, Denmark's economic success is truly remarkable. However, this model is still not perfect, as it relies heavily on exports. Denmark is facing rising risks from global trade tensions and constantly shifting tariffs. If demand for pharmaceuticals, one of its current key sectors, slows down, the ripple effects could spread across the entire economy. And as global shipping costs become increasingly volatile, Denmark's maritime industry is also vulnerable to shocks that could impact a sector that employs many workers. So how does this entire system continue to operate, especially considering that Denmark has some of the highest taxes in the world? Why don't such high taxes drive businesses away, slow down growth, or weaken their global competitiveness? The answer does not lie in how much Denmark taxes, but rather where it collects those taxes. Unlike many countries that rely heavily on taxing businesses and wages, Denmark shifts most of the tax burden to personal consumption and income. A payroll tax refers to contributions must pay on top of their wages, such as Social Security or unemployment insurance. Income tax is the amount individuals directly must pay on the money they earn. And in Denmark, this tax is very high, with a top marginal rate exceeding 55%. In addition, there is the value-added tax, a type of consumption tax, applied to nearly every transaction at a rate of 25%. Denmark's VAT is among the highest in the world. At first glance, this seems like a heavy burden, but in return, they receive clear benefits. Corporate taxes, on the other hand, are relatively 22%. Low. This rate is lower than the OECD average of 23.6%, and much lower than Germany's 29.9% or France's 25.8%. This means businesses face fewer barriers when hiring, reinvesting, or expanding operations. And in reality, this has proven effective. Denmark is now one of the countries with the highest startup rates in Europe. The country strongly supports entrepreneurs through grants, streamlined administrative procedures, and a tax system that encourages reinvestment instead of heavily taxing profits. The World Bank even ranks Denmark among the easiest countries in the world to thanks to digitalized management and a streamlined legal system. That is also why cities like Copenhagen have become major startup hubs, attracting founders and investors from across Europe. And the issue is that, in the end, business profits still eventually return to individuals. Shareholders cannot sustain themselves solely on earnings. They still need dividends or to sell shares to generate capital gains. Thus, taxing individuals when this income arises essentially produces the same effect. And this is precisely what Denmark's model even more interesting. Although personal income tax is high, Denmark does not impose heavy payroll taxes on employers like many other European countries. This makes hiring costs more manageable, even compared to countries with lower income taxes but higher labor costs. As a result, businesses save money, workers still receive good wages, and the government still collects enough revenue to fund universal health care, free education, and generous social benefits. But Denmark's hybrid model not only helps businesses operate more smoothly, but also helps workers significantly reduce risks in their lives. Like Sweden and Norway, Denmark also has very strong worker protection policies, but their uniqueness lies in a system called... This system allows businesses to hire and fire, while workers are still guaranteed, unlike countries such as France or Italy, strict labor laws make layoffs extremely costly and complicated. Legally speaking, companies in Denmark without facing too many restrictions. But the most important thing is that when workers lose their jobs, instead, they can receive up to their previous salary for up to 2 years, depending on their seniority, in agreements with labor unions. And instead of simply giving Denmark benefits, supports workers more proactively through vocational training, skill upgrading, and helping them find new jobs. As a result, businesses are not afraid of losing their jobs. This system also supports them through major life transitions. Parental leave policies are very generous and shared between both parents, with a total duration of up to 52 weeks, most of which is paid leave. Flexible work options like part-time work or remote work help both men and women stay employed, especially after having children. All of these factors help explain why Denmark has one of the highest labor force participation rates in the world of working age employed. This figure is comparable to Norway and even slightly higher countries that also have strong welfare systems. Even more notably, this rate is much higher than the social safety net is less comprehensive. People should have a stronger incentive to stay employed. High taxes and a large welfare system only work effectively, and Danes do. While all Nordic countries have high trust levels, Denmark consistently ranks at the top. Public spending in Denmark is transparent. People receive are of high quality, so they clearly see the benefits of the taxes. Instead of viewing high taxes as a burden in their own lives. And thanks to this trust, social inequality remains low, with the lowest income disparity in the world, as shown by its Gini coefficient, a measure of how evenly income is distributed in society. A Gini score of 0 means perfect inequality, where all income goes to a single person. Denmark's Gini coefficient is only 0.2, and thanks to this trust, the level of inequality in society is very low. Denmark is one of the countries with the smallest income gaps in the world, as shown by the Gini coefficient, a metric that measures how income is distributed within a society. The lower it is, the more equal the income distribution. A Gini score of 0 means perfect equality, while a score of 1 means perfect inequality, where all income goes to a single person. Denmark's Gini coefficient is only much lower than the US at 0.4 or the UK at 0.3, even though both countries have certain welfare programs. A clear example of this equality is the pay gap between CEOs and average workers. CEOs in Denmark typically earn only about 60 times the average salary of a worker, while this number in the US reaches nearly 290 times. Denmark also reduces inequality through its tax policies, where low-income earners receive deductions within a progressive tax system. These policies enable some low-income households to have an effective income tax that is even negative, meaning they receive more support than the amount of tax. Housing policy also plays an important role. Homebuyers in Denmark can lock in a fixed mortgage rate for up to 30 years, even when they move to another home. This helps avoid what is known as the lock-in effect, where people are forced to stay in their old homes because rising interest rates make moving too expensive compared to when they first bought the house. Additionally, Denmark provides strong support for rental housing, low-income families, helping keep housing costs affordable, even in major cities. All of this results in something rare, a strong and stable middle class, which becomes the driving force of the economy. So, yes, the Danish model works extremely well, but that also raises a bigger question. Can other countries replicate this model? The answer is quite complicated. Because while high taxes don't harm Denmark, that doesn't mean a similar model would work everywhere. Denmark has advantages that most other countries simply don't. One of them is simply population size. With only around 5.9 million Denmark people, is small enough to run a model that relies on high trust and high taxes without facing the complications that come with managing a large and diverse nation. Compare this to the US, with 345 million people, or even Germany with 84 million. Smaller countries tend to act more quickly, are easier to govern, public services are easier to coordinate, and policies that need adjustments when problems arise can be modified faster. Another important factor is that Denmark is one of the most homogeneous countries in the world. More than 84% of its population is ethnically Danish. Share similar cultural and historical backgrounds. Economists, for obvious reasons, tend to be cautious when discussing this. But human nature shows that smaller and more homogeneous communities are more likely to build a foundation of trust, especially regarding sensitive issues. According to an academic survey, up to 88% of Danes say they are happy to pay taxes because they believe the government uses the money effectively Compare this with the U.S., where only around 16% of people believe that the federal government will do the right thing. In a society with such low levels of trust, high taxes are often seen as theft. People assume their money is being wasted, and decades of political gridlock, corporate lobbying, and bloated bureaucracy have only further weakened trust. Moreover, trust is not Denmark's only advantage. The country also benefits greatly from its geography and its trade networks. Denmark sits right in the center of Europe, surrounded by some of the wealthiest markets in the world. Nearly 70% of Denmark's exports are sold to European countries, and its trade-oriented economy thrives thanks to stable international relations. Now compare this to a country like Brazil, where exports rely heavily on commodities with highly volatile prices soybean and iron ore. When global prices fall, the economy is immediately hit hard. Therefore, a Denmark-style model with high taxes and generous welfare would be difficult to sustain in economies with high income inequality, weak institutions, or political instability. Then there's the historical factor. Denmark's model was not built overnight. It took decades of gradual reform and continuous adjustments, rooted in trust between the government, businesses, and workers. Countries with histories of political instability, weak institutions, or corruption will struggle if they try to apply the same model. Therefore, other nations cannot simply copy and paste the Danish model, but they can certainly learn from it. One of the key lessons is that high taxes do not automatically destroy an economy if the tax structure is designed properly. Many countries tax businesses and wages too heavily, making hiring and expansion less attractive. In France, for example, businesses must pay over 45% towards social security, driving up hiring costs, slowing job creation, and raising unemployment. Denmark avoids this problem by keeping corporate and payroll taxes lower, while focusing taxation on consumption and personal income. Another important lesson is that investing in the long term pays off. Denmark spends nearly 6% of its GDP on ensuring a highly skilled workforce that continuously upgrades its abilities. The country also invests over 3% of GDP in research and development, making it one of the world's leading innovation-driven in terms of innovation. Compare this with Italy, which spends only about 4% on education and 1.4% on. So it's no surprise that the country struggles with stagnant productivity and a shrinking industrial base. The lesson is that investing in people and innovation, as Denmark does, is essential for sustaining long-term economic growth. Finally, labor market flexibility is also crucial for countries struggling with rigid labor laws or high unemployment. Finding a balance between protecting workers and giving businesses flexibility may be the key to unlocking stronger growth. But here's the problem. Even Denmark is not immune to challenges. Since the 1980s, nearly all of Denmark's population growth all come from immigration. Even though the government has many policies supporting young families, the number of people choosing to have children remains very low. Has helped solve the labor shortage, especially in sectors like healthcare, construction, and services. But at the same time, it raises difficult questions about the Danish welfare model. Many studies show that low-skilled immigrants tend to have higher unemployment and contribute less in taxes, raising concerns about long-term sustainability. To respond, the government has tightened welfare eligibility and requires newcomers to meet stricter criteria for residency and employment. Denmark has also adopted a work-first approach, meaning it focuses on integration and helping immigrants find jobs instead of long-term support. At the same time, the country still needs highly skilled workers to sustain its key industries. So they have implemented fast-track visa programs for occupations with high demand, such as engineers or information technology specialists, aiming to attract international talent who can directly to the economy. This is a very delicate balance and may become Denmark's biggest policy challenge in the coming decades. But immigration is not the only issue. Like many other developed countries, Denmark is also facing an aging population. Currently, 1 in 5 Danes 65 years old, and an older population means a greater tax burden on working-age people and more pressure on the pension system, a difficult test for any welfare model. But this is exactly where Denmark's core strength lies: adaptability. The model that helped them modernize their economy and build a strong middle class is now being used again to confront future challenges such as demographic shifts, automation, and climate change. Denmark has begun gradually raising the retirement to 70 age and adjusting it according to life expectancy to ensure the pension system remains sustainable. The country is also digitizing public services at one of the fastest rates, with over 90% of citizens using digital IDs to access healthcare services, banking, and government portals. Denmark is also investing heavily in healthcare innovation, from robot-assisted surgery to artificial intelligence diagnostic in hospitals, all aimed at reducing future labor shortages. Denmark is also experimenting with automation in many sectors, from autonomous agriculture to smarter logistics, where machine learning algorithms are already optimizing global shipping. Denmark's greatest asset has been its people. The country has invested heavily
expects
in
a lot
human
in
capital,
return.
but as this workforce ages, Denmark will need technology to fill the gaps that people can no longer cover. Fortunately, with strong financial resources and a belief that new technologies rather than replace them, Denmark is likely one of the best positioned countries in the world to face these challenges. Now, with all that, it's time to place Denmark on the economic ranking rather than replacing them. Denmark is perhaps one of the countries with the best position in the world to face these challenges. Now, with all that in mind, it's time to place Denmark on the economic ranking. Starting as usual with the scale factor. Denmark has a GDP of over $4 billion, ranking 35th in the world, right after Vietnam and just before Iran. This scale isn't too large, but still very impressive. For a country with a population smaller than New York city in this category, Denmark scores 7 out of 10. With just 5.9 million, the country's GDP per capita reaches $75,000, among the highest in the world. This figure is even higher than Germany, the UK, the Netherlands, and even Qatar, a country with virtually unlimited oil resources. However, it should be noted that Denmark is still slightly below the US. Its people do not have to work nearly as hard to achieve this level of income. This number is higher than Germany, the UK, the Netherlands, rich and Qatar. Even so, Denmark still edges out the US slightly. The noteworthy point is that Danes don't need to work as much as Americans to reach that income level. In this category, they score 9 out of 10. Stability and trust in Denmark are very high. This is one of the most transparent democracies, reliable and effectively run in the world. Low corruption, strong institutions, and a population that truly trusts its government. That is very rare. Denmark receives 10 out of 10 for this category. Denmark's growth remains stable, not explosive, but in a world full of economic volatility, and for a country already very wealthy, such stability is not bad at all. Their economy is driven by high labor productivity, innovation, and strong exports, especially in maritime transport, agriculture, and renewable energy. In this category, they score 7 out of 10. And finally, the industrial sector, although small in scale, Denmark still demonstrates strength far beyond its size. This is the home of Novo Nordisk, the most valuable company in Europe. Maersk, one of the world's largest shipping corporations. And Vestas, one of the leading wind turbine manufacturers globally. Denmark also owns a vibrant startup and spends heavily on R&D, making the country an important innovation hub. They score 8 out of 10, losing points because although very innovative, their industrial scale is still small and specialized compared to true industrial powers. Japan, the US, and China. This brings Denmark's overall score to 8.2 out of 10, very high on the rankings. However, unfortunately, if a certain individual achieves his ambition, this country could become even smaller. The Kingdom of Denmark also includes Greenland, a vast, desolate remote land, and isolated in the Arctic Ocean, the world's most powerful economy greatly desires. Finally, Denmark's story shows that prosperity is not luck, but the result of long-term vision, social trust, and a carefully designed economic model. Although this model is not perfect and still faces many challenges ahead, very few countries can adapt, reform, and innovate as strongly as Denmark while maintaining stability. Denmark's story reminds us that even small nations can create large impacts if they invest in people, embrace flexibility, and prioritize the instead of short-term gains. Vietnam, like Denmark, is also searching for its own toward long-term stability and prosperity, but must confront challenges specific to an emerging economy, rapid growth, a young population, growing industrial capacity, and deeper integration into global supply chains. Vietnam is fully capable of adopting parts of Denmark's model, especially in fields like education, digital transformation, and renewable energy. However, Vietnam still needs to tackle major issues uneven labor productivity, dependence on low-cost labor, and the need to strengthen institutional trust in order to sustain higher quality growth. If you find these analyses helpful and want to continue following in-depth content based on data like this, remember to like the video, share it with friends who might be interested, and don't forget to subscribe to Knowledge Station to get the latest videos.